Everyone knows Ice Cube the icon, but almost no one knows the storms that shaped the man. From a childhood shattered by loss, to a brotherhood broken by pride, to a $9 million decision that nearly froze his career. This is the story of a legend who refused to bend, even when the world tried to push him down. At 56, Ice Cube stands at a crossroads, his past heavy, his future uncertain, and the truth behind his journey is far more heartbreaking, inspiring, and human than anyone ever realized. Before the world ever called him a legend, life had already tested if he would even survive. At 56, Ice Cube stands in a place many people dream of reaching, yet very few understand. From the outside, it looks like he has everything anyone could want: money, respect, a long career, a strong family, and a legacy that changed music and film. But when you look closer, you realize his journey has never been simple. Even today, there is a quiet pressure around him, a kind of storm that follows, a man who has carried heavy responsibilities for most of his life. He may look calm when he is on a Big Three court, on stage, or sitting at home. But behind that calmness is a man shaped by years of hardship, loss, and choices that were never easy. People know Ice Cube as the voice behind Straight Outta Compton, the writer who created Friday, the businessman who co-founded the Big Three League, and the actor who proved he could stand in any arena. But before all the success, he was a boy trying to stay steady in a world that was not steady at all. Today, even with all the achievements behind him, he still carries questions and memories that never fully leave. When he looks back, he knows each step forward came with a price, and every victory brought its own pressure. Fame did not erase the struggles. If anything, it added new ones. At this age, Cube reflects more than he used to. He is older, wiser, and quieter. Not because he is tired, but because he has seen enough to understand how life can rise and fall without warning. When he appears at Big Three games, he carries himself with the confidence of someone who built something from the ground up. Yet the truth is, he built many things from scratch: his career, his reputation, his name, and even parts of his identity. None of it was handed to him. And that history still sits inside him. It is a long road from cracked sidewalks in South Central to standing inside glass mansions overlooking the water. It is a long road from a teenager writing rhymes in a notebook to a man running leagues, producing films, and supporting a whole generation of young creators. That contrast shapes everything about him. He knows what it feels like to have nothing and what it feels like to have more than he ever imagined. That kind of journey changes how a person sees the world and how they see themselves. Even with his success, Cube often asks himself a few quiet questions. What did it truly cost to become Ice Cube? What did he have to lose along the way? And which parts of pain never really healed? The world sees the wins awards, #1 albums, hit films, and sold-out shows, but behind every win was a hard moment that left a mark. Through the years, he lost people he loved, walked away from opportunities that others would have begged for, stood firm on principles that cost him money, and held his ground in industries that do not always reward honesty. Some storms are loud and easy to see, others stay inside, pressing on a man day after day. At 56, the storm around Cube is not about fame fading or money running out. It is about understanding what the journey took from him and deciding what he wants the rest of his life to look like. It is about living with the weight of old memories, some painful, some inspiring, and accepting that even when life is peaceful, the mind remembers everything. His sister Beverly's death is one of the memories that never leaves him. He was just a boy when it happened, and it changed the direction of his life. It forced him to grow up before he was ready. Years later, the fallout with N.W.A. became another deep cut. It was not just business, it was friendship, trust, and brotherhood breaking apart. And then came the heaviest regret of all, the loss of Eazy-E. They never got the chance to fix things. Cube still carries that regret, even decades later. And although he rarely talks about it openly, the regret sits quietly in the background of his story. There were also the moments when he chose principle over money, including the $9 million movie role he walked away from because he refused to break his personal beliefs. That decision came at a cost to his career, and he felt the industry shift in ways he could not control. When Hollywood began moving forward without him, the silence around him grew louder. Even someone as strong as Cube can feel the sting of being pushed aside after dedicating so many years to the craft. All of these moments, his sister's death, the romp, N.W.A. breakup, the grief over Eazy-E, the decision to stand firm on the vaccine issue, are pieces of the same story. A story of a man who has been fighting storms since childhood and still manages to stand tall. A man who never asked for an easy life, but always demanded a true one. A man who understands that staying true to himself has a price, but it is a price he is willing to pay. So, when you look at Ice Cube today, you are not just seeing a famous entertainer. You are seeing someone who has survived more emotional battles than the world will ever know. Someone who carries both pride and pain in the same breath. Someone who built his life with his own hands but still wonders, in quiet moments, what the journey took from him and why certain memories remain so heavy. And to understand the storm closing in at 56, you have to start where the first crack appeared long before anyone had ever heard the name Ice Cube. Some lives don't begin with dreams, they begin with a loss. So deep, it never quite leaves the room. Ice Cube's early life in Westmont was already challenging, but nothing prepared him for the moment that would change everything. Westmont was a place where people woke up every day, hoping to stay safe until the night ended. The days always felt a little dim. The streetlights flickered even before the sun went down, and sirens passed by often enough that kids learned to ignore them. His parents, Hosea and Doris, worked hard to give their children the best life they could in a neighborhood that didn't always make that easy. His father worked at UCLA, doing long physical jobs under the sun, and came home tired, but still trying to keep the house together. His mother worked at a hospital, strict but caring, trying to make sure her children stayed focused and safe. They weren't wealthy, but they were steady, and in a place like Westmont, steadiness was a blessing. Their home had a routine that Cube remembers even today. Dinner was usually quiet, not because anyone was unhappy, but because everyone was tired, and silence felt safer than bringing attention to things they couldn't control. The sound of utensils touching plates, the ticking clock on the wall, and the soft hum of appliances filled the gaps in conversation. It was a house trying to stay normal, while the world outside never truly calmed down. Inside, his parents tried to build a shield around their children, hoping they could grow without being touched by the chaos around them. Among the people in his life, his older sister Beverly stood out the most. She was a little older, full of warmth, and had a presence that made the house feel lighter. She laughed easily, brought energy into the room, and made Cube feel like there was always someone watching over him. Beverly wasn't just a sibling. She was someone he admired, someone who made the world feel a little less sharp. But everything changed the day she died. She was in her late teens, still young, still full of life, and her death came so suddenly and so unfairly that it didn't seem real. Cube was only 12, too young to understand everything, but old enough to know that something terrible had broken the balance of their home. The day they received the news is something Cube never forgot. His mother fell to her knees, her hands covering her face, as if she could block out the pain. His father didn't cry, but the silence in his eyes said more than words ever could. He just stared down, unable to stand straight, unable to find something solid to hold on to. Cube stood outside watching the car that would take Beverly away. He kept his hands in his pockets, trying to stay still, but inside he felt something heavy sink deep into him. It was a feeling he couldn't explain, a sense that a part of himself had dropped into a place he would never fully reach again. After Beverly's death, the house changed. The warmth that she used to bring was gone. His mother spent long hours staring out the window without saying a word. His father became quieter, speaking only when necessary, as if every sentence cost him energy he didn't have anymore. Even small moments, like shared meals, felt different. The same clock ticked on the wall, but now it sounded louder, filling the space where Beverly's voice used to be. Cube noticed that even laughter, when it did return, didn't sound the same. It was softer, almost unsure, as if the family wasn't sure they were allowed to be happy again. Walking through his neighborhood, he began to see life differently. Before Beverly's death, the streets were just the streets. After her death, every sound and shadow reminded him that life could change without warning. He learned early that nothing was guaranteed, and that the world didn't make promises about safety, time, or the people you love. That awareness made him older than his age. He didn't complain about life or ask why things happened. He simply learned to carry the weight, quietly, because no one around him had a choice either. At school, something inside him changed too. He wasn't the same as the other kids. They laughed with an ease he no longer felt, joked about things that didn't seem funny to him anymore, and moved through the day without the heavy thoughts that followed him. Teachers might have seen him as smart or serious, but they couldn't see the reason behind it. He kept to himself more, listened more, and talked less. It wasn't because he wanted to be distant, but because he felt like he lived in a different world than the kids sitting next to him. His classmates didn't know about the quiet mornings at home or the long nights filled with the sound of a mother trying not to cry. They didn't know what it meant to lose someone so suddenly. That early grief became the foundation for everything that came later. It shaped how he understood life, how he handled pressure, and how he carried himself. It taught him discipline, because he saw what fragility looked like. It taught him to focus, because he knew life didn't wait for anyone. And most of all, it taught him to hold his emotions tight until he found a way to release them safely. He didn't share his pain with others. He held it inside, looking for a way to let it out without breaking. He needed somewhere to put all that pain, and when he finally found it, it didn't just change his life, it changed American culture. Before the beats, before the fame, it was just a boy, a dim lamp, and words heavy enough to crack his chest open. Ice Cube didn't discover writing because he wanted to be a rapper. He discovered it because he needed somewhere to put the pain he had no language for. His first encounter with writing happened almost by accident. A friend challenged him to write a few lines, just for fun, just to see what he could come up with. Cube didn't expect much from himself, but when he put the pen on paper and the words came out, even he was surprised. They were sharp, honest, heavier than anything he had ever said out loud. It felt like the words had been waiting inside him for years, and the moment he wrote them, something inside him shifted. It didn't feel like a game anymore. It felt like a release. Soon, he found himself writing late into the night. While the rest of the house slept, he sat at a small desk under a weak light bulb that barely lit the paper. Outside, the usual sounds of sirens and passing cars drifted through the window, but Cube focused on his notebook, letting the words spill out. Every line he wrote felt like reopening a wound, but also like letting it breathe for the first time. It was painful, but it was the kind of pain that brought relief. He didn't need a therapist. He didn't need someone to explain his feelings. Writing was enough. When he wrote, the weight he carried became easier to hold. He realized no teacher had ever taught him to express himself like this. The lessons came from the life he lived and the ache he carried. As Cube got older, his life became split between two different realities. Each morning he took a long bus ride from South Central to Woodland Hills, where he attended Taft High School. The ride felt like traveling between two worlds. He would lean his head against the bus window, watching the city pass by in a blur. The houses, The people, the energy, everything changed as the bus moved. In South Central, life felt tense and unpredictable. In Woodland Hills, life looked easy and comfortable. He didn't fully fit in either place. When he was home, he felt the pressure of a neighborhood where people fought to stay safe. When he was at Taft, he felt like an outsider, carrying experiences that the other students couldn't understand. Taft High School had polished floors, cleaner hallways, and students who moved through the day without the same weight on their shoulders. They laughed freely, talked loudly, and planned their futures as if everything would, to work out smoothly. Cube couldn't relate. Even when he answered questions in class or walked through the halls, he felt like he had a backpack full of invisible memories. No one around him knew about Beverly's death, the quiet tension at home, or the fear that lived in the streets he came from. He wasn't ashamed of where he came from, but he knew it made him different. Writing became the only place where those two worlds made sense together. After high school, Cube tried to follow a safer path. He enrolled at the Phoenix Institute of Technology to study architectural drafting. The work came naturally to him. He was focused, disciplined, and good at following structure. Drafting offered something that life rarely did: clear lines, firm angles, predictable outcomes. It seemed like a future that would give him stability. But as he sat at the drafting table, drawing clean lines and studying blueprints, he realized something important. No structure he designed could rebuild the disnice pieces of his own life. No amount of lines or angles could fix what had been broken inside him years earlier. He could build houses on paper, but he couldn't build healing. The safe path didn't feel real, and deep down, he knew he wasn't meant to stay there. After a year, Cube made a decision that would change his life. He walked away from the safe option and returned to Los Angeles with nothing but determination and the kind of ache that made him hungry for something bigger. This wasn't rebellion, it was honesty. He knew he needed something that allowed him to breathe again, and music was the only thing that had ever done that. He started performing with his cousin Sir Jinx, forming a group called CIA. They played at backyard parties, where the energy was raw, and the crowds were mixed with friends, neighbors, and whoever else showed up. The setups were small, just speakers, makeshift stages, and people eager for something real. But these parties gave Cube what school never could: a place where his words mattered. It was during these nights that Dr. Dre noticed him. Dre wasn't just listening to the sound of his voice. He noticed the weight in Cube's writing, the precision, the honesty, the courage to say things others didn't dare to put into words. At just 16, Cube wrote "Boys and the Hood." He had no idea that one song would open the door to everything that came later. He didn't know it would help shape a new era of hip-hop. He didn't know it would introduce him to the world. And he definitely didn't know that the price of stepping through that door would be higher than he ever imagined. He gave N.W.A. the words that shook America, but behind the studio glass, someone else was holding the pen on his future. When Ice Cube sold Boys and the Hood to Eazy-E at just 16, it was the first moment when someone in the industry truly recognized the power of his writing. He was still a teenager, unsure of where life was heading, but the day Eazy-E paid for that song, Cube felt something he'd never felt before: validation. For the first time, an adult in the music business looked at him and saw talent worth investing in. That moment planted a seed that would grow far beyond anything he expected. Soon after, Cube became part of N.W.A, a group that would not only change his life, but change music forever. The early days in the studio were full of hunger, noise, jokes, arguments, and late-night energy. Everyone in that room wanted to make something big, something honest, something that reflected the world they grew up in. They weren't trying to be polite. They weren't trying to fit in. They were trying to tell the truth. Cube brought notebooks filled with raw ideas, sharp lines, and stories people outside South Central didn't want to hear. When he recorded, the air shifted. His voice carried weight. and the group felt it. Straight Outta Compton became the earthquake no one expected. It wasn't just an album, it was a statement. Kids everywhere connected to it instantly. Parents hated it. Politicians tried to ban it. News outlets argued about it. The FBI even sent a warning letter, but none of that stopped the movement the group had started. Cube's writing was at the heart of that movement. He turned the daily experiences of young black men in tough neighborhoods into words the whole country had to face. His lyrics were fearless, honest, and often uncomfortable because they reflected a reality many people preferred to ignore. But while the world was responding to N.W.A.'s message, the business side of the group was telling a different story, one Cube didn't see at first. Behind the scenes, contracts and percentages were being handled in ways that didn't match the work he was putting in. The money the group earned didn't match the money Cube received. When the album sold millions, Cube expected his success to be reflected in his paycheck. Instead, he received only $32,000. For an album shaking the nation, that number didn't make sense. At first, he tried to brush it off, telling himself maybe it was normal for a new artist. But as time passed, he realized the numbers still weren't adding up. It wasn't just about money, it was about respect. Cube wasn't getting the credit or the share he deserved, even though he wrote large portions of the music that pushed the group forward. When he asked questions, the answers were vague or dismissive. Meetings behind closed doors continued without him. Decisions were made that he didn't hear about until later. The people he thought were his brothers were benefiting from his pen while keeping him in the dark. The more he learned, the more he understood he was being used. That realization cut deep, especially because he trusted them. Walking away wasn't just a business decision, it was an emotional one. Leaving N.W.A. felt like stepping off a cliff. Everyone told him he was making a mistake. Some called him disloyal, others said he was ungrateful. People inside and outside the industry whispered that he would fail without the group. He didn't have the big money, the industry protection, or the business experience they had. All he had was his voice, his notebook, and the belief that trusting himself was safer than trusting people who had already betrayed him. Still, the decision filled him with fear. He was walking away from fame, stability, and a group already on top of the world. But once he left, Cube's next steps proved exactly who he was. His first solo album, N.W.A's Most Wanted, hit harder than anyone expected. Critics praised it. Fans loved it. People realized Cube wasn't the guy who left N.W.A. He was Ice Cube, a voice with something powerful to say. Then came Death Certificate, a bold and unapologetic album that tackled social issues head-on. After that, The Predator became a major success, showing that Cube could not only stand alone but dominate the charts. Each album was a message back to everyone who doubted him. He didn't just survive after leaving N.W.A. He grew, he evolved, he became stronger, more focused, and more respected. He proved that the power behind N.W.A. didn't come from the name, it came from the writing, and much of that writing had come from him. His solo career showed he didn't need the group to speak to a nation. His voice carried on its own, and the world listened. Yet even with all this success, something else lingered beneath the surface. The breakup with N.W.A. wasn't just about contracts or money. It broke friendships. It built walls that stayed up for years. Cube moved forward because he had no choice, but the emotional weight of what happened never fully disappeared. Betrayal stays with a person, even when life moves on. He had walked away from the group that made him famous. He didn't know yet that the cost of that decision would follow him all the way to a hospital hallway years later. Hip-hop gave him a voice, but Hollywood would test whether he could be seen as anything more than the angry young man with a mic. When Ice Cube stepped into acting for the first time, many people in the industry didn't believe he could succeed. They saw him as a rapper known for tough lyrics, not as someone who could carry emotional scenes on camera, but director John Singleton saw something different. Singleton believed Cube had a natural seriousness and honesty in his expression, something that couldn't be taught in acting classes. That's why he offered Cube a role in Boys and the Hood. He saw a young man who understood the pain and struggle the film was trying to show. Cube wasn't trained as an actor, but the role allowed him to process his own experiences and feelings in a new way. When the movie came out, people were surprised by how real and believable Cube's performance was. It wasn't acting for him, it was telling a story he already knew too well. After that success, Cube wanted to create something different, something that showed another side of life in the neighborhoods he grew up in. That led to Friday, the film he co-wrote and starred in. The movie had a small budget of only $3.5 million, and no one expected it to become a hit. But Cube didn't want to focus just on violence or hardship. He wanted to show the simple, everyday side of the neighborhood, the humor, the people, the conversations, the typical day on the block. The film connected with audiences in a way big studios didn't expect. Instead of making $3.5 million back, Friday made over $28 million and became a cultural classic. Cube proved he could write stories that felt real, funny, and meaningful without relying on stereotypes. As his confidence grew, Cube decided to build something long-lasting. He created his own production company, Cube Vision. Through it, he produced films like Barbershop, Are We There Yet?, Ride Along, and 21 Jump Street. These movies showed he wasn't limited to one genre. He could write comedy, family films, action movies, and still keep his unique voice. Cube Vision gave him control over his work. He learned about budgets, marketing, casting, and all the behind-the-scenes decisions Hollywood rarely let black creators handle at that time. It wasn't easy. Every film carried risk. If a movie failed, he would feel it directly. But this was the path he chose, and he pushed through because he wanted ownership and respect. The more he worked, the busier his life became. His schedule was filled with 16-hour days, back-to-back filming, writing sessions, interviews, and tours. Some days he would wake up on a tour bus, fly to a film set, work all day, and then fly to another city to perform on stage. It was exciting, but also exhausting. He rarely had time to rest. Hollywood expected him to stay productive, deliver hits, and keep proving himself again and again. No matter how much he achieved, there was always the pressure to create the next big project. That constant pressure started taking a toll on him mentally and physically. Success began to feel like a cage in its own way. When Cube was young, success was something he dreamed about. But once he had it, he realized every step upward came with new demands, more responsibility, more eyes watching him, more chances to fail, more people depending on him. It's easy for fans to see the fame, the red carpets, and the money. But behind those moments were long nights, stress, doubts, and the fear that one bad project could erase years of work. Cube was tough, but even he felt the weight of expectations. He had to stay sharp, disciplined, and constantly ready for the next challenge. On top of that, he struggled to be taken seriously in some Hollywood circles. Many people still saw him as just a rapper who got lucky. They didn't understand the amount of work he put into his writing or how carefully he built his production company. He often had to fight for the right to control his own projects. Some studios didn't trust him with big budgets. Others doubted his vision. Cube had to prove himself repeatedly, even after he had already shown he could deliver successful films. He knew he was capable, but getting Hollywood to fully respect him took time. Even with these challenges, Cube continued to push forward. He wanted to open doors for himself and for other black creators who weren't being given opportunities. He wanted to build a path where he didn't have to depend on anyone else's approval. His determination kept him moving, even when he felt drained or overwhelmed. He believed in hard work, and he wasn't afraid to do more than people expected from him. Each movie, each script, each production taught him something new about storytelling and business. Those lessons helped him survive in an industry that changes constantly. But while Hollywood was applauding him, the people waiting at home were paying a price that no red carpet could ever cover. In a world cheering his name, the quiet question waiting at home was far more brutal. Is Dad coming? Before Ice Cube became a household name in music and film, he was just a young man trying to figure out his place in the world and trying to win the heart of a woman who didn't fall for him right away. When he first met Kimberly, she didn't pay him much attention. She wasn't impressed by his early success or the small fame he was starting to build. She carried herself with calm confidence, and Cube found that both refreshing and challenging. He kept noticing her, even when she barely noticed him. But over time, as she saw his sincerity and the seriousness in his character, her heart softened. They began talking more, understanding each other, and slowly building a connection that felt real and steady. It wasn't fast or dramatic. It was natural. By the time they were together, they were partners in the truest sense, supporting each other through small struggles and big ambitions. Their early marriage was simple, far from glamorous. They lived in a small place with a squeaky couch that made noise every time someone sat down. Their plates were cracked from years of use, and they counted grocery money carefully, making sure every dollar stretched far enough. But they had big dreams. Even when their fridge hummed louder than the television, and their nights were filled with quiet meals instead of celebrations, they believed better days were coming. They trusted each other, and that trust became the base of their family. As years passed, their family grew. They had 5 children: O'Shea Jr., Daryl, Karima, Deja, and Sharif. Each child had their own personality, their own spark. O'Shea Jr. was observant and thoughtful. Daryl had a creative streak and a calm nature. Karima and Deja were private, choosing lives outside the spotlight. Sharif, the youngest, moved with a soft confidence that came from being surrounded by strong siblings. Cube loved all of them, deeply, but his career often pulled him far from home. And that meant Kimberly carried most of the daily responsibilities. She cooked, cleaned, managed schedules, and tucked the kids into bed night after night. She became the steady light in the home, the one keeping everything running when Cube was away, promoting music, filming movies, or writing scripts. She didn't complain. She just kept going, even on days when she felt the weight of it. The hardest moment in their marriage came during one of their sons' birthdays. The day had started with excitement. The cake was set on the table, balloons tied to chairs, the candles ready to be lit. The kids waited with hope, expecting Cube to walk through the door at any moment. But hours passed, and he still wasn't there. The candles burned low, the cake began to sag. One of the balloons drooped toward the floor as the air inside slowly leaked out. Their son kept holding a small gift he had wrapped for his dad, turning it in his hands, while he asked Kimberly, "Is he coming?" She forced a small smile and said, "He's trying," even though she wasn't sure herself. Eventually, the boy fell asleep on the couch while still holding the gift. Kimberly sat at the kitchen table with her head lowered, sadness clear in her posture. When Cube finally came home late that night, he didn't need anyone to explain what happened. The house told the whole story. He saw the candles melted into puddles. He saw the half-deflated balloons. He saw his son asleep with the gift he had been waiting to give. And he saw the quiet hurt in Kimberly's eyes. It didn't come from anger. It came from exhaustion. It came from carrying the family alone for too long. In that moment, something broke inside Cube. He realized he wasn't just missing events, he was losing memories he could never get back. The repair didn't happen with one apology. There were no dramatic promises, no sudden changes. Instead, Cube made a steady decision to show up differently. He chose presence over excuses. He chose to come home even when he was tired. He chose to slow down when work tried to swallow all his time. He started paying attention to the small things, helping with the kids, sitting with Kimberly even if the day had been long, attending school events when he could. He understood that providing for his family financially meant nothing if he wasn't providing his presence, his patience, and his love. Slowly, the tension eased. The home felt warmer again. Kimberly saw the effort he was making, and she met him halfway. Their marriage didn't become perfect, but it became stronger. In 2015, a moment arrived that changed everything for the family. Their oldest son, O'Shea Jr., played Cube in Straight Outta Compton. Watching his son act out the struggles, the pain, and the early life he once lived was emotional for Cube. He sat in the theater, surrounded by his family, watching scenes that reflected some of the hardest chapters of his youth. Seeing his own story through his son's eyes didn't just bring back memories, it healed parts of him he didn't know were still wounded. It reminded him of how far he had come, and how much his family meant to his journey. The pride he felt that day was something no award could match. It wasn't just a movie role, it was a generational moment, a reminder that his efforts to be a better father were worth it. Family became the part of his life that grounded him, guided him, and gave him peace through every challenge. But even as he held his family closer, one relationship remained frozen in time, stuck at the intersection of pride, silence, and a goodbye that came too late. The world lost a legend that day, but Ice Cube lost the one person who first believed a 6-year-old kid's words were worth paying for. Long before fame, charts, or headlines, Cube and Eazy-E were just two young men trying to turn their talent into something real. Their early days were spent in cheap studios with mismatched chairs, dusty carpets, and equipment that barely worked. But inside those small rooms, they built a brotherhood. They stayed up late, played beats over and over, argued, laughed, and pushed each other to be better. Eazy had a unique instinct for spotting talent. When Cube wrote Boys and the Hood, Eazy didn't hesitate. He bought the song and told Cube he had something rare. For Cube, that moment wasn't just business, it was validation. Someone older, smarter in the streets, and already respected believed in him. It meant everything. But as their careers grew and money entered the picture, things became complicated. What started as a brotherhood slowly turned into a business machine, where trust got harder to keep. Misunderstandings piled up, managers got involved, contracts weren't explained clearly, promises got mixed with pressure. Cube felt like the group wasn't treating him fairly, and Eazy felt Cube didn't understand the business side. Neither of them wanted things to fall apart, but pride, confusion, and outside voices caused a deep divide. Diss tracks followed. Hard words were exchanged in public. They were both hurt, and both believed they were the one betrayed. The friendship that once felt unbreakable suddenly felt distant. Years passed. Cube moved on with his career. Eazy kept building his own path. But underneath the success, the silence between them grew heavier. Neither of them reached out. Neither apologized. Neither tried to fix it. Sometimes people expect time to heal everything on its own, but time only makes unresolved wounds harder to touch. They continued living separate lives, and neither knew how little time was actually left. Then one day, Cube got the call. The news hit with shocking speed. Eazy was in the hospital, and it was serious. It wasn't gossip or rumor, this was real. The diagnosis was AIDS, and complications had led to a sudden, severe pneumonia. The situation was moving fast, too fast. There wasn't going to be time for long conversations or slow healing. If anything was going to be said, it had to be said now. Cube felt the weight of all the years rush toward him at once. Every memory, every argument, every moment he wished had gone differently. He went to the hospital, but nothing about that walk felt normal. The bright lights, the smell of sanitizers, the low beeps of machines or nurses moving quickly. It all felt unreal. He stopped outside Easy's room. His hand touched the door handle, but he couldn't push it. He froze. What could he say after all the years of distance? How do you start a conversation that should have happened long ago? All the anger was gone, replaced by a sadness he didn't know how to express. He stood there, stuck between wanting to go in and not knowing if he deserved to. In that silent moment, he realized how pride can trap people, making them wait until it's too late. Cube never opened the door. He never stepped inside. He never got to say the words he had carried in his chest for years. A short time later, Eazy was gone. He died at only 31 years old, a life cut far too short. The world reacted with shock. Fans mourned loudly. The media flashed headlines everywhere. But Cube's grief was quiet and private. He didn't scream. He didn't make dramatic statements. He carried the regret inside him. Not the kind of regret that fades with time, but the kind that settles deep and stays. Over the years, Cube spoke about Eazy with respect and sadness. He never tried to rewrite their story. He admitted they were just kids who got caught in something bigger than they understood. They were young men trying to build something great without the knowledge or guidance to protect their friendship along the way. When Cube talked about Eazy in interviews, his voice softened. You could hear the love that was still there and the regret that never left. He never blamed anyone. He just told the truth. They were brothers who drifted apart before they had the chance to make things right. The lesson shaped Cube for the rest of his life. He realized that doors don't stay open forever. The chance to say, "I'm sorry," or "I miss you," or "let's fix this," doesn't wait for the perfect moment. Sometimes the person you plan to reconcile with isn't there anymore. Sometimes silence becomes the last chapter of a relationship because neither person was brave enough to speak first. Cube carried that lesson into adulthood, fatherhood, marriage, and business. That regret would echo years later when another decision forced him to choose between comfort and conscience, this time with the whole world watching. At 56, the hardest battle wasn't for charts, tickets, or ratings. It was for the right to look in the mirror and still recognize the man staring back. Ice Cube had spent his whole life standing on what he believed in, even when it cost him friendships, comfort, or opportunities. But nothing tested that more than the moment he walked away from a $9 million movie role because he refused the vaccine requirement the studio demanded. It wasn't loud or dramatic. He didn't argue with executives or make long public statements. He simply said no, stepped back, and accepted whatever would come next. The world saw the headline, "Ice Cube turns down $9 million," but only he knew how deep the bruise really went. Losing that role wasn't just about the money. Money had never controlled him. The sting came from something more painful: momentum. In Hollywood, big roles protect you. They keep your name in conversations. They keep studios interested. They keep opportunities alive. Walking away from such a massive paycheck meant he also walked away from the quiet advantages that come with it. Suddenly, the calls slowed down. The scripts that used to arrive quickly now came less often. Younger actors filled roles he once would have been offered. Cube understood the business well, enough to know what was happening. Hollywood wasn't punishing him, it was simply moving on. And sometimes, that can hurt more. He once joked that Hollywood is like weather. If you aren't paying attention, you wake up in a season you didn't expect. For him, winter came early. It wasn't cruel, it was quiet. People didn't check on him the way they used to. Meetings were shorter, interest was softer. When you give decades to an industry and suddenly feel it drift away, even the strongest person feels that shift somewhere deep. For Cube, the hardest part wasn't being rejected. It was realizing that time moves faster in Hollywood than anywhere else, and once it moves past you, catching up becomes twice as hard. But instead of reacting with desperation or anger, Cube chose calm. That calm came from knowing he had been counted out many times before and still rose. People doubted him when he left N.W.A. They doubted him when he started acting. They doubted him when he created his own production company. And they definitely doubted him when he tried to start a professional basketball league. Each time, he proved them wrong. So this new season didn't scare him. It simply reminded him that he had always survived storms by trusting his own judgment. The Big Three was one of the clearest examples of that trust. When Cube announced he was building a 3-on-3 professional basketball league with retired NBA stars, many people laughed. Investors were skeptical. Journalists questioned whether he understood sports business. Some said he was dreaming too big, but Cube didn't back down. He wanted to create something new, something fair, something exciting. He handled arenas, contracts, player partnerships, marketing, and countless legal details. The league burned through millions before it made a profit. Every dollar spent felt like a risk, but he stayed committed. Today, the Big Three is respected, growing, and proving he was right to believe in his own vision again. His financial success didn't happen overnight. Every piece of it came from decades of grind. His net worth around $160 million isn't just a number. It represents years of late nights, early mornings, heavy decisions, and sacrifices. His Marina del Rey mansion shows just how far he traveled from his early life. The home sits along the water, with tall windows that open up to peaceful views. It's a calm place where he can breathe and think. Then there's the Encino estate, a much larger family home with a gym, recording space, a beautiful yard, and room for family gatherings. Tall hedges surround it, giving privacy and safety, two things he didn't have growing up. His car collection tells its own story. The '64 Chevy Impala connects him to his West Coast roots. The Rolls-Royce Ghost reflects the success he earned. The Porsche Panamera shows his taste for speed and precision. The Escalade is for family trips. To him, these cars aren't trophies. They're reminders each, one marking a different chapter of a long journey. At home, Cube's life looks different now. His kids are grown, each following their own path. O'Shea Jr. is acting. Daryl works in music. Karima, Deja, and Sharif are pursuing their own dreams, choosing privacy or creativity in their own ways. Cube is now a grandfather too, a role that softened him more than he expected. When he talks about his grandchild, his entire expression changes. Family gatherings have become one of the joys he treasures most. Holidays are filled with laughter, food, and stories. Backyard barbecues, simple dinners, and everyday conversations mean more to him than premieres or award shows. Kimberly remains the steady center of his life. After all the years, all the storms, and all the successes, their partnership still stands strong. They've faced hard moments, misunderstandings, and long distances because of his career, but they got through each stage with patience and commitment. Kimberly was the person who saw him before the fame, and she continues to be the person who grounds him the most. Cube also gives back quietly. He doesn't brag about his philanthropy. He supports programs that help young creators, kids in tough neighborhoods, and people who need access to opportunities he never had at their age. His belief is simple. Don't just hand things to people, give them the tools to build on their own, help them open doors, show them paths, let them shape their futures. Inside himself, Cube feels more balanced now. He's not bitter about Hollywood changing. He's not desperate to fit into trends. He feels anchored in who he is. He still tours. He still works on projects. He still builds. But he does it with a different mindset now. More peace, more patience, more appreciation for life outside the spotlight. He understands that success isn't only measured by applause. It's measured by the people waiting at home, the memories you make, and the stability you create for the next generation. His life is a living example of how far a person can come, even from the toughest beginnings. From cracked sidewalks to glass mansions, from grief to legacy, from being doubted to becoming a cultural figure, his journey shows that nothing is impossible when you refuse to break. Cube's story reminds us that life is full of storms, but storms don't last forever. What matters is how you stand through them and what you build afterward. It teaches us to make peace while the door is still open, because time doesn't wait for anyone. As this chapter of his life continues, Cube stands as a man who has weathered many battles and still walks forward with confidence and clarity. And as you finish this story, remember that your own story isn't finished either. You still have chapters to write, choices to make, and storms to overcome. May your home be filled with peace, your health stay strong, your days bring you joy, and your heart find courage for whatever comes next. May you walk forward with hope, knowing that the next chapter belongs entirely to you.